Hello everybody, my name is John Herman. I am one of the planetarium educators at the Museum of Arts and Sciences there in Daytona Beach, not too far from the campus actually. I am a alumni of Embry-Riddle, a former student of Dr. Lear's, and she asked me to give you guys this presentation on the book The Martian, as well as just sort of relating it to my experiences with a program called the Mars Desert Research Station, and some other stuff within the sort of realm of space flight and that sort of stuff. So hopefully it's pretty interesting for you and pretty entertaining. And on November 7th, I'm going to be there for you guys to ask me some questions over this video and just over spaceflight in general. So yeah. All right, so very quickly, we'll just go over the sky tonight, and this is on November 6th, so the same day that I'll be there in your class. And I'm going to set the sky here to roughly around 8:30-ish, and more or less this is what you would see in the sky if you were to go outside in the Daytona Beach area that night. One of the things being Mars, off to the southeast sort of direction there. Mars is obviously a place that has captured our imaginations for centuries, and countless stories have been written about Mars. Obviously, The Martian is the most recent sort of story that has hit the mainstream on stories that have been written about the red planet. One of the other some of the other things are H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, where the Martians came and invaded us, and Jules Verne even thought that the valleys and craters there on Mars were home to some sort of ancient Martian Venetian civilization. We know that life does not exist in a living state there on Mars. But one of the things that NASA has done is pretty recently, actually, they launched a rover that is on its 7-month journey to Mars currently, and it's called Perseverance. And Perseverance is really, really important because it is the first spacecraft of its kind ever dedicated to the search for life. But like I said, we're not looking for life in a living state, but what we are looking for with Perseverance are microscopic fossils of microorganisms, bacteria essentially, that would have been living on Mars, swimming around in the water, the liquid water there, about 3 billion years ago, before Mars lost all of the liquid water that it has and the majority of its atmosphere as well. So when it comes to my experience with the Martian in the real world, essentially, I went on a thing in 2016, 15-16, called the Mars Desert Research Station, and it's a facility that you can see off to the right-hand side of this screen, out in the middle of the desert in Utah. The closest city has about 100 people that live in it, called Hanksville, Utah. And what it is essentially it's called a isolated confined environment. That's what NASA's sort of official term is. And what that basically means is that it's a place where they send people to live in total isolation away from the world, basically, in a confined space for however long. I was there for 2 weeks, but there's other places called the High Seas facility in Hawaii, which is on the side of Mount Kilauea, the volcano there. There's other places that NASA has at their facilities at Johnson Space Center, and there's numerous others around the world as well. The Mars Desert Research Station, or MDRS, that I went to, I was the crew biologist, and we stayed there for 2 weeks. High Seas, as I mentioned earlier, they stay there for 8 months. So the times differ for the sort of different experiments that are there around the world. And so, yeah, I was there for 2 weeks, and I was the crew biologist, and part of my research was dedicated to doing medical research there on the crew members. But unfortunately, my equipment broke while I was there, so I wasn't able to do that science that I set out to do. So in my state of boredom, I decided to just rummage around and see what past crews had left there at the station. And one of the things that I found was some seeds. And so having a sort of biology background, I figured that I would try to plant those seeds and sprout them, and I successfully did. They were radish seeds, so we didn't have any potatoes there. We did have potatoes, but they were dehydrated, which is a whole nother lecture in and of itself. If someone wants to ask me about the food at MDRS, I'll be more than happy to talk about it. But yeah, so I grew radish sprouts there at MDRS, and it was completely unplanned. And so similarly to the Martian, Mark Watney grew potatoes there on the surface of Mars. Now, in the real world, there is some research that's being done on whether or not that is possible. Current sort of science points to we can grow it, but we don't know if, one, it's safe, because root-bearing plants like potatoes or other sort of tubers, they soak up the nutrients and other things that are in the soil. So, for example, if you plant potatoes in irradiated soil, like from Chernobyl, the potatoes soak up a lot of that radiation and make it inedible for human consumption. So Mars is one of those places that is highly irradiated because it doesn't have a magnetic shield like Earth does. And so that's one of the challenges that faces astronauts going to Mars in the future, is how do we provide food for ourselves? How do we come up with these solutions to make food? That's one of the things that the Mars Desert Research Station looks at, is how do we get around these solutions here on Earth so that we can better do that stuff on a future celestial body that we send humans to. Currently, the only place that we've sent humans to is the moon under the Apollo program. There are current plans underway to send people back to the moon for good this time under their new Artemis program, which includes sending the first woman to the moon as well. And Artemis is basically having us set up a permanent base of operations on the south pole of the moon. And the Martian, they didn't do that. They had a space station that would launch back and forth from Earth to Mars using something called a Hohmann transfer. Now, they came up with some fancy science fiction maneuver to get the crew back from Earth in a faster time than it normally would take. But as of right now, we don't know of any way to do that. The Martian is actually a really interesting book because it has a lot of valid science in it. There's a lot of science in the book that sort of checks out. Like, we can grow potatoes in Martian soil. Again, we don't know if it's edible, but we can grow it in Martian soil. That's pretty much the general consensus right now. Sending humans to Mars is a bit trickier because it takes between 6 and 9 months one way to get there. So I believe that was mentioned in the book as well. And one of the things that Mark Watney had to deal with on the surface of Mars is, how do you survive? I don't have any experience with surviving alone in the desert, and there's no human alive that has the experience of surviving on a whole another world besides our own, where there's no sort of lifeline there. Nobody has that experience. And so that's the beauty with science fiction, is that we can ask these sort of what if questions and try to figure out answers and solutions before these problems can arise. An example of that is Apollo 13. When things started to go wrong, that was something that we didn't really think of. It was sort of the golden age of space flight, and no one really thought that the problems that went wrong would have gone wrong. And so, again, that's the beauty of science fiction, is that we can ask these questions and come up with solutions, albeit far-fetched ones and sort of narratively convenient ones, like the maneuvers that they did in the book to get the crew back to Mars a little bit quicker. But The Martian is a pretty spectacular book, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And yeah, again, I'm going to be there on November 6th to give you guys a Q&A there in class. So if you have any questions, start thinking of those and feel free to ask me anything, basically.